Welcome, everyone, to this week's Cat's Eye on the Future. Tonight, I want to welcome back Lynn, the Psychic Focus Lady. Welcome back, Lynn. Glad you could make it this evening.
Hi, thanks. I'm glad to be here. This is great.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, we were talking about a lot of stuff the last time you were on, and I thought this time you just have so many topics in your wonderful blog. Why don't you just go ahead and start out with a couple of things you wanted to go over?
Sure. I mean, I've had a lot going on actually toward the end of 2014 and coming into 2015. We had the missing flight. That was huge. And, there was a lot of dialogue back and forth and a lot going on with that. Just real quickly, kind of what I got with that was, this plane, it takes off, and I saw that it was actually hijacked, and that's how it went down. And I had a lot of readings, a lot of people interacting with me about that, so that was a pretty intense moment for me. We had riots here in the United States in Ferguson, and that was huge. And I saw a lot of government activity and a lot of just strange activities along with that. And people there, my heart, it went out to them. It was really, pretty devastating. And then, we deal with all these dark topics and we talk about this stuff. And I just felt like, people needed some kind of boost, some kind of elevation. And kind of at the end of the year, I went over and I did a New Year's, kind of like a prediction reading. And at the end of the reading, I really thought, I'm like, we need to sort of as a society, as just humans, elevate our vibration and kind of open us up to something more and something better that's out there. We have all these negative things happening in our life, and all this negativity is kind of bringing us down to this lower level. So I've really, made this push to be a little more positive, a little more uplifting. So, I kind of started to intermingle my readings more, and I've been doing things on the power of intent and the law of attraction and how we can kind of, manifest our destiny literally, different things that I've seen and just different readings that I've done. So I've done a wide variety of readings, some of it heavy and dark, but I've really, tried to make an effort to lighten it up and give people that hope that they need rather than have everything be so negative. So yeah, it's a wide variety, a wide mix of stuff out there right now, but it's interesting. I love it all, and I love the questions and the people that come to my blog. It's been great.
Can you give us the most recent update kind of on the flight thing? I was reading that over in your blog, and you thought you did a really good job of updating things, but I gather you had a very interesting conclusion there at the end, and I wonder if you could tell us about it.
Sure. When I first tuned in on it, was when it first happened, and someone gave me a question on the blog. So immediately I tuned into it, and I saw this image of the plane being hijacked, and it was all affiliated to this ISIS thing that's going on. But kind of to backtrack through that, I feel like ISIS is being funded by something that's not truly ISIS. ISIS is more like the cover story for a bigger picture of kind of what I saw as a conglomeration of U.S.-based and British-based powers that be. So anyway, I see it all being rooted back to this ISIS, where ISIS went in and, they kind of went in a disguise as if they were something that they weren't. And they went in, hijacked this plane, and they were going to use the plane, and I couldn't figure out if it was going to be for a weapon itself or if it was going to be for just transportation purposes. But I got that they wanted a small plane, and that's what they were seeking out. So they went in, they hijacked this plane, and in the process of doing so, I saw that they escaped with a plane. I saw it land on an island and then take off and go to this desert location, namely where this ISIS location is. But, as the news came in, the media came in, they're finding bits and pieces of this plane. Still things didn't add up. I mean, yeah, they're finding pieces of this plane. That wasn't what I saw. So I'm trying in my mind to make sense of what really happened. And I came to the conclusion that I really felt that the plane got away, that it landed and it actually ended up in the desert, and the ISIS had control of it, and they were going to do what they were going to do with it. But as pieces started to be found, it was almost like the proof was there that this plane went down. And it came to me in trying to sort all this out that sometimes, psychics, when they see things, they see a certain timeline, or they see, a path of what would normally happen. And I felt as though that I saw what the true intention was. I saw what the whole plan was laid out. But the reality of it was that, free will intervened and the plane went down. And that it actually did really crash, but I still see it as a hijacking. I feel like the evidence that comes to light is never going to say that it was. It's all been hidden. Things have been really strange with it. I guess the waters are shallow there, but they can't seem to retrieve it. It's just so many things didn't add up, and so many things didn't seem right about the situation that, I still question if I did see it right and maybe they got away. But I do have to consider the fact that, I could be wrong. I could have seen what I thought was going to happen, and in reality, free will changed what that true path was. But nonetheless, I see that it was instigated through a hijacking situation, and it wasn't necessarily weather related or instrument related. I see that people actually came in, and that's really what the root of all this was.
Yeah, I've had experiences like that too, where sometimes I'm sure that I'm onto something and it doesn't quite pan out the way I think it's going to, or I dream it, especially this happens with dreams. And, I don't know if there are other timelines or not. That's a big question for me. But as you said, it could either be a different timeline or something that was their intention, but maybe it's not what actually happened in reality. But I think it's really good to review stuff like that. And it'll be interesting to see in the future if any more information comes out on that, if we ever find out. What about Ferguson? You mentioned that. I didn't see that reading on yours, so I'll be listening too.
Sure. What happened was a bunch of rioting, broke out over the court ruling, and it got really ugly. It got really dangerous. There were people there. There was looting. It was really an ugly situation. But the thing of it is I saw this as even a bigger issue and a different issue than how it was being portrayed on TV, in that it was almost like a test of, what would martial law be like, or what is it like when the police force gets intervenes like this with all this rioting situation. I felt like it was more of a test ground, and that the police were there almost instigating it and keeping it going. It just felt unnaturally propelled. It felt like there was some kind of energy intervening that was almost keeping the situation fired up rather than trying to mitigate it and have it go away. It just didn't settle right with me. And, the more I read it, it just felt so odd that I just felt like there was this constant instigation of events going on. And, I even posted that on my blog, and I just said it's not flowing right. I see that it's more antagonistic. There's other parties coming in and making sure that this fight keeps going. And it seemed like they were testing just to see how people would react to different situations, to see how accepting people were of maybe, the police coming in and their authority, or, being forced to deal and accept a situation. And I had so many people send me personal emails. Even one person said, I lived there, and it's odd to see it on the blog, see my city, my hometown there. And she goes, you're right. It is. It feels so unnatural of how this is being handled, that it's just being perpetuated. And it was like it just couldn't rest. People couldn't get closure. It couldn't, it was just always something to keep it rejuvenated, whether it was media or, actions on the street. It just kept going on and on. That was kind of interesting to read. Yeah.
I didn't get to see the blog post on that, but we were following the story. It was broadcast, of course, over here in Europe and on the net. And I have to say that it would not surprise me what you're saying, because I said to my husband at the time, it just didn't feel right. There was something about it that just seemed kind of, if not staged, played up, that something kept trying to make it more and more intense than it already was.
Mm-hmm. That's
Well,
exactly how. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sorry. For my listening audience, we're recording this over Skype, and in Ireland, the internet has been a little weird today. So if occasionally Lynn and I talk over each other, it's not that we're being rude; it's that there's a slight delay on the Skype. So I'm doing my best here, but sometimes we may have a little miss there. But speaking of intentions, on a much more positive note, why don't you tell us a little bit about your intentional work?
Well, because I deal with all of this heavy negative stuff, occasionally I need to kind of purge the lower vibrations and kind of recenter myself and refocus. And just like the universe works in balance, I kind of want my blog to work in balance too. And at times I feel like I'm dealing with, a lot of negativity, which is important. People are curious. I'm curious, and I want to know, and I want to, test my own boundaries. But I've started to really be conscious of, the more positive aspects of life too, whether it's, increasing your vibration or learning about how to see things in more of a positive light and how the positivity comes back to you. One of the readings I did to, regarding intention and, the power of thought was someone was asking me something even just on baby gender. I thought, well, this is a great way to, break it up, change it up. And it's interesting. I mean, how the world works, how the universe works. I'm always trying to, look outside the box. Well, so I focused in on it, and I was getting about how, what you think about is really what you get. And, sometimes you might think, oh, for example, with a baby gender, I want a boy, I want a boy, I want a boy. And many times that'll come to fruition to you because that's what you put your thought and your energy into. But it kind of works in a strange way too, because if you focus on, I don't want a girl. I mean, if you put that thought, like if you actually say that, the universe doesn't really deal in negative. The universe doesn't hear the lower vibrational speak, so to say. So instead of saying, I don't want a girl, it hears, I want a girl, and you're going to get what you don't want. Not that all life isn't beautiful, but, there are people. There's men who want to have, a boy to live on their family name, or maybe you want a girl because, you were close with your mom and you want that relationship. I mean, people can have a preference when they're pregnant, but what you focus on is what you're going to get. But if you add a negative to it, it's almost like it flips what your focus and intent was. So I've really been thinking about that. And, I'm a firm believer in the law of attraction and how that works. And it was just kind of an interesting spin of how like the universe hears our thoughts or, responds to the, intent and focus that we put out there. So I've really tried to, if I have a mantra, whether I'm, smudging my house or I'm, got something I want in life. Like if I want a parking spot, you don't focus on, I hope there's, or, you don't use the negative. You focus on, I hope there's an empty spot. I hope there's an empty spot rather than don't let the parking lot be full. It's just a different way of saying the same thing, but one way gets you the result you want and one way doesn't.
It's keeping a positive intention rather than a negative. One thing that we didn't talk about before the show, but I found really fun on your attempts to obviously lighten the blog a little bit. I really enjoyed the pictures that your friend put up, and without telling you what they were, and sometimes he didn't even know, and sometimes he did, sometimes he didn't, and you read the pictures, and it was really fascinating because you really seem to be very spot on and tuned in. But I thought that was very fun.
That was a lot of fun, and what it is, he's someone, and he's made comments, on different posts that I've done for a long time. And it's to the point where, he'll put a comment and I'll respond. He goes by the name Dada on my blog. So, he's done that for, I don't even know how many months that he's been on there. And we've ended up forming kind of a friendship, both through email and through the blog. And he proposed to me one time. He said, hey, what would you think if I did this? And I'd just submit some random pictures and, he does a quick write-up on them and we post them. It'd be like a little fun Friday thing. I'm like, I think that's a really great idea. And we did it once and people really liked it. So we kind of have this ongoing thing that every other Friday we'll post some stuff on the blog and he'll do a little write-up. And he has a pretty cool sense of humor, how it comes through in his writing style. So yeah, that worked out really well. And you're right, it does lighten the blog, and you can deal with your serious issues, but it's all about balance, and that's what I'm trying to really strive for. Make people feel good. I don't want to always feel like I'm, sharing stuff that's kind of heavy and dark and puts people in a bad mood. I want people to come and feel uplifted and energized. And what I even try to do too was have people focus on, when we're reading a heavier issue that maybe does feel negative, look at the positive in it, whether it's we're spreading truth, whether it's realizing that, you don't always have to believe what you're told, and how good and empowering that feels to actually realize that there's something out there more than, what's always being put in your face. Just if you look at the positive, and even those dark, heavy topics, turn it around into empowerment and truth, and you're finding other like-minded people out there that maybe you feel the same way they do, but you just don't have anybody in your personal circle to talk to. Well, I like my blog being that place, and I feel like I've even formed friendships between people that have posted comments, and that's such a great thing to bring like-minded people together, because a lot of people, don't have someone that they can just open up to or talk about a different idea that's not mainstream, or maybe they're embarrassed, or just, whatever the reason may be. But I feel like my blog serves as a place to have that happen, and it's just a really good feeling. I'm so happy and so humbled by what it's become that, it's amazing.
Yeah, I was really impressed. And like I said, I totally understood your feeling the need to get a few light things in there, because I think it's an occupational hazard of those of us that look at current events, especially in the psychic, is usually what we wind up focusing on or even asked about tends to be kind of dark, heavy subjects, and that can get really unbalanced. And I really loved what you had to say about the universe always moving towards balance, because I've noticed that even in readings, that energies tip one way and then they tip another way, and they never quite stay, together very long, but they always seem to be striving for it. Okay, well, that's really interesting. I think at this point you had some other things that you wanted to go over. Some of them are relatively heavy, but we'll move to the moderate, to the heavy, and then to the inspirational, I think, if that's okay.
I think that sounds like a great flow. I'd like that.
Okay, so the first question is kind of not really necessarily either way. This is about you'd mentioned, or you had somebody write in about noises in the UK, which is what you were reading on specifically. But I understand, having listened to people like Lynn and stuff on Coast to Coast, that these noises have been heard by people all over the world, but it was specifically for the UK. So that's what you're answering for. I don't know if you have any information on whether it's the same answer for the other noises or not, but I'd like you to just go ahead and talk about what you saw, and then we can take that question up towards the end of that.
Yeah, I did get that question about the UK, and you're right. People have heard them all over the world, but the main focus was the UK, and I probably had 3 or 4 different people write to me about it. So I focused in on it, and the first thing that I got, and it was so eerie, because if anybody's ever seen the Titanic out there, there's one scene where the ship, the Titanic, where it cracks in half right before it sinks, and that metal, that screeching, that noise that the boat made, it's almost like this haunting, eerie noise. And I kept hearing that sound over and over in my head as I was going through this reading. My impression was that even if that's not the sound that's being heard, it's a sound that's almost indescribable, and it rings almost to your core, if that makes sense. It was just so intense. So as I focused on it more, to figure out and see what it was telling me, I got that what's happening is that there's certain tectonic plates, or there's some kind of thing with the earth there, and our earth is actually growing. And many times before, and I think I've even said it on your show, I see our earth as a living thing. I've meditated before, and I've seen the ground actually raise and lower, just like how your lungs, or how your chest would, as your lungs inflate and deflate. Well, I see the earth like that, and I just feel this life to it, and I feel this, this living force. And what I get is, the sun, it shines down on, the plants and the trees and the grass and everything else. And as these plants and everything absorb the nourishment from the sun, it helps them grow. Well, the earth is like that too. The earth is always absorbing energy from the sun. And as a result, it too is growing. And as it's growing and stretching, it's making these noises. And it may even grow fractions of an inch. And I remember in the reading, I was even questioning, well, is that enough to make this noise? And I got the response that, a fraction of an inch can really mean a lot. I mean, over a period of time, if say you have that every year, that makes a huge difference. And the thing that I felt was odd too was I saw the earth, and around the equator, it looked like it had a belt. And it was like the belt was getting tighter and the equator was getting bigger. But it's like the earth is growing in an east and west fashion versus in north and south. I don't see the north and south growing taller, but rather I see the earth growing wider from east to west. And I got that essentially these noises, this sound that we're hearing is this stretching and growth of the earth itself. It's like growing pains in a sense. And that's why it's being heard all over. But where it is in the UK, there's just actually tectonic plates there stretching apart.
Did you get any sense in the UK with this might be the precursor to earthquakes or volcanic activity?
I do. As the earth stretches and it's doing that, and it's not just localized to the UK. Anywhere where there's tectonic activity like that, I see it happening. I get an image a lot of when I focus on this topic of an area around like Alaska, right in there, like there is some sort of fault line or some kind of action in the ocean, and I get a lot of it is going to be in that area, but some of it is in the UK. I see it much more mild in the UK than I do kind of off Alaska, but nonetheless, I get that that's the root cause of a lot of that type of seismic activity.
Yeah, I know they've recently found after a couple of moderate quakes there that there are a lot of old faults running under the UK, particularly England. It's just that it's been a long time since they went off. Now my husband, with his PhD in Old English and Old Norse studies, went, oh, of course there were quakes. And he said something, 900 something or other or something. I'm going, yes, honey, but most people aren't remembering back quite that far. But I gather there's something like, and I'd have to look it up, but it's like the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle or something where there's some quakes mentioned. But there just aren't a lot recently, but it doesn't mean that the faults have gone away. It just means they've been quiet for about 1,000 years, which sometimes is not a good thing when it comes to quakes.
I didn't know that. That's interesting. Yeah. I didn't know that. Huh.
Well, see, when a fault, like being from California, I originally grew up with this. When you have the two plates moving together, whether they're moving side by side, pushing or up and down motion, when they sometimes they lock and they don't move for a long time. And then when they do move, it tends to be a lot more explosive because you've got all that pressure built up. Whereas if you have smaller, there's a theory that if you have a lot of smaller quakes, it may actually make it better. Although I don't think we've really had seismographs around long enough to be sure of that. But they do know that when quakes don't move for a long time and then suddenly go off, it can be can sometimes be very powerful. So, take that for what it's worth. That's our science, our best science for the day. Okay, so the next question I have here, I actually wasn't able to find us on your blog, I confess, but I'm going to be as eager to hear this as the listening audience is. You had something about MK Ultra I think you wanted to talk about.
Yes, I get a lot of questions about, some of the actions that occur, throughout the world are tied to, the theory is, this reptilian agenda. And so what I did was I took a lot of these questions, kind of put them together, and formed a blog entry so I could think about it and see what I got. And interestingly enough, I got that everyone in their brain has this like little reptilian brain. And what happens is, and I visualized this ET race, this alien race that is rooted with the reptilians. And what it is this race, it's almost like they lack emotion, they lack empathy, they lack the understanding of just the whole human compassion and interaction. Like the emotional side is viewed as a liability rather than a beautiful gift. And so you have this race, and a lot of the actions that happen throughout, the world are based upon these powers that be, that a lot of them are this kind of reptilian rooted DNA race. And the way that they control people and manipulate people and kind of rise to the top, whether it's, shortchanging people through money and usury, or, malicious acts or violence or threats, like all this type of negative activity that allows them to rise to the top, gain power, gain control, is done through this programming. I got that, for these reptilian race of people, and it's more of like a DNA rooted thing rather than, we don't see, walking alligators, but, it's more like within their DNA. You have these people that rise to the top through kind of, I want to say kind of like malicious acts, or just, lack of empathy is what a lot of it is. More selfish, self-centered acts. They rise to the top, gain control. A lot of these 1%ers that, make their money on the hard work of others. They're all this kind of reptilian rooted DNA. Not everybody that rises to the top is, but there's a good portion of them that are. But for them to be able to do that and continue to manipulate people, kind of make the world work around the way they want it to work, they have to do this. It's almost like spell casting. If people banded together, we could essentially evolve spiritually and throw this whole reptilian agenda, reptilian, mentally driven people in this group, we could throw them out. But through their mental manipulation, whether it's, it could be media, marketing, all kinds of different forms, they keep us subdued and they keep us dumbed down. So we fight amongst each other versus them fighting against, the greater good and trying to kind of take our earth back and make it a more happier place to be in. And a lot of what they do is through the way they talk and the way we talk to each other. It's almost like this spell casting thing where, as long as we are issuing these spells on each other, it keeps us kind of weak. It keeps us dumbed down. It keeps us from, increasing our vibration and becoming what we really have the power to be. And I was really fascinated because this blog entry was based not only on just what I got, but it's interactions I've had with friends, it's stuff that I've read, and it was like everything just started to come together. It was almost like bits and pieces of things started to have these aha moments for me. And I came across some things that we say to each other, and it's like, why do we talk to each other this way? For example, if you want someone to have good luck before they go out on stage, what do you tell them? You tell them to break a leg. Well, when you think about it, why would you say that to somebody? Or maybe someone looks really beautiful. They're getting ready to go do something. You say they're drop dead gorgeous. It's like, why would you use that terminology? And I just kept seeing these different references of the things that we say to each other. And it was like I had this moment of, wow, we really are kind of keeping ourselves in this frame of mind, in this constant state of being weakened or being, dumbed down. Even different words like the word you, Y-O-U, that's the one that really got me. One of my friends said, do you realize what you're saying when you say you? And in English, we say that to each other all the time. You is really a female sheep. So it's like we're calling each other sheep when we use the word you. And, and then I thought about it and, had a different discussion with a different set of friends. And, back in Shakespearean times, it was like our language was completely different. Something's happened over the years that's incorporated what almost could be viewed as violent talk to each other. When you tell someone, have a good weekend, you're actually like telling them to feel weaker on Saturday and Sunday. It's like you're saying, you have less strength, you're weakened. And then someone else pointed out to me, do you realize more deaths happen on Monday morning after you're weakened? And it's almost like you're wishing that upon someone. It almost goes back to the law of attraction and how that works and the power of intent. Well, what intent are we sending to each other? And so this reading just went on, and it took different turns, but it was so enlightening as to how, we're letting some of these powers that be control us and keep us weaker. And I feel like that was part of my real moment too, where I felt like, I need to use this blog to kind of get people to be a little more higher vibrations and be more conscious of what our intent really means and how we talk to each other. And it's hard because our language incorporates so many things that you don't even think about as being negative. We just take it for granted because that's what we're taught. I mean, from the time you're in school and learn to speak, you hear these terms, you hear these phrases, so it just becomes part of our normal language. And it didn't used to be that way. It used to be completely different, but it's almost like this agenda has taken control of us. And as we continue to, re-energize these spells that we have on each other. I mean, there was this thing on Facebook a while ago, and you were dumping buckets of ice on yourself. And when you think about it, what are you saying? You're icing us. And this is going on social media, on Facebook. And even though to some people that might sound like a big leap and a big stretch of, contorting words around, it's like we're accepting and taking in what we're being told. And it's almost like desensitizing you to the bigger thing. It's like you're allowing it in your life. You're opening up your subconscious. Even if your conscious mind is totally aware of what's going on, the real work is done on the subconscious level. And it was just a really interesting reading, and it went into a lot of different variances of how we manipulate each other and why it's still kind of going on and why we haven't been able to rise up above it and kind of take our planet back. If we were able to allow people to invent things and implement these different things all over the world, we could have free electricity. We could have food to feed everyone, but we don't, because we have these powers that be that want to keep us against ourselves and maintain control. If we lived in a place where everyone was happy and all our needs were met, it takes the power away from the top. And I'd love to see it reverse. I want to bring that awareness about. And, I don't think we're going to be able to change our language overnight, but it's just something to consciously think about, or more importantly, subconscious, put that into your being of who you are. Try to refocus that energy and, do what you can to bring it up and bring others up along with you. Really interesting reading, really deep and pretty thought-provoking. It was an intense ride for sure.
And I want to remind our listeners, and we'll go over this again at the end of the show, but you can read all of these things at Lynn's wonderful blog. Is it Psychic Focus?
Yes, it's psychicfocus.blogspot.com.
Okay. So now I think, since we've been talking about that, I think the next question is really, really apropos, though I have to say this is probably one of your more controversial readings, but being that you're willing to go where angels fear to tread, I gather you did some looking at Hitler and came up with some rather interesting psychic information.
I did, and I'll be honest, I had a couple questions come through to me, and, I don't believe in coincidences. I think everything happens for a reason, and synchronicities are part of life, and it's kind of your message that it's something you need to do. So, I had a request come through on my blog, and then I had an email over Hitler, and then someone else just in talking mentioned Hitler, and I'm like, okay, so I meant to do this reading, and at first I sort of dodged it because it felt negative, it felt heavy, and I just wasn't ready to do it yet. You read through the blog and you have certain things jump out at you, and I felt myself intentionally looking over this, but one day I'm like, okay, I am meant to do this, I need to focus in on it. And I remember when I first tuned in, it was hard because, when you go into a reading, you have to be unbiased to it. And, growing up, you're programmed to think a certain way, feel a certain way. With regard to Hitler, I mean, in school, you learn about the Holocaust, you learn about the war, you learn about all these things that he did. So I had to really force myself to quiet all that down and just let information flow. And I remember this is probably one of the most challenging ones I had as far as letting all my personal stuff go to truly work on getting an unbiased reading. So I did that. I cleared myself, and I just kind of went forward from there. And it was really interesting because I got that, Hitler, he took Germany from nothing. They were bankrupt. People were starving. Their economy was horrible. And he changed all that around. I saw this bartering system taking place where rather than borrowing money from the banks, people were, doing work for work. And there was all this trade going on. And he tried to set up a financial system in which, the usury was gone, all the, high interest rates and all the things that kind of kept people down and almost made it impossible to get out of debt or be impossible to get a little better. He did away with that system, and he was working on his own financial system. And I got that the true root of the war was not so much all this other stuff, but it was all rooted down to money and how he was handling the finances and how he was handling the economy and turning everything around, and people were happy. And then all of a sudden it went from a dire situation to people thriving. Education, people were getting their education. He promoted families. He wanted all this unity and all of this stuff. He was doing that, and it threatened the wealthy people at the banks, the people that were running the banks, that were making all the money in this situation. They were mad because Hitler didn't need them anymore, and they looked at it like he was stealing their money, or he was preventing an opportunity from happening. And when he shoved all the bankers out, he didn't want anything to do with that. He didn't want anything to do with porn and all the propaganda and all the stuff that other people were bringing into his country. It upset him because they were making a lot of money off of the Germans. And was Hitler perfect? No, he wasn't perfect. In the war, a lot of ugly things happened. And I'm not trying to say that he's completely innocent, and some bad things didn't happen, but things didn't happen the way that we were taught. I saw this stuff in my mind about how he changed everything around. And he shooed the Jews out of Germany because he felt they were the root of why his people were poor, why the economy was in the shape it was in, because, a lot of the wealthy Jewish bankers were the ones making the money off of the interest and all the usury and whatnot. So he did, that was true. He wanted them out of Germany. Did he kill them? I didn't see it go down that way. I saw that he shoot them out, yes, and he was very, he wanted Germans to marry Germans, and he was very, stern with that. He had definitely that type of attitude about him. But did he want to go around killing a bunch of people? No, it didn't come through to me that way. Did some people die? Yes, but German people were, raped and killed and tortured probably more so than what, any other country was. And I got that the real evil person from the war was Stalin. It wasn't really Hitler. And, so the interesting thing was, as I went through this reading, I kept seeing questions pop up in my mind, almost like a PowerPoint show would pop up in your mind. It would say stuff of, who really made out from the war, and who, if Hitler was so bad, how did he get such a large following? And if Hitler was so bad, how did a country the size that it was defend itself against all these other people? And it was like the more questions that came to me, it just made sense that maybe what we were shown wasn't really true. It was almost like these questions were put into my subconscious to make me question the reality of what we have now. And then, I was asking myself, well, you've seen these pictures. They've broadcasted this stuff of the Holocaust and people with their heads shaved and all this kind of stuff. And then I got, the answer to that question, because I'm posing this, I'm asking questions and seeing questions as I'm going through this reading, and it's almost like the questions are what propelled the reading and kept it going. But as I was going, and I'm visualizing this picture of like people with shaved heads and, these train cars full of people. I'm like, well, what was that all about? Is this falsified or what? And then the answer came to me, and it says, a picture's worth 1,000 words, but a picture with an incorrect caption is like priceless. So all this stuff, I got that in reality, these people are fleeing out of Russia under Stalin's control. They're fleeing into Germany, not being tortured. And, these people are trying to get out of Russia to save their lives. And they're running with whatever they have on their back. And these shaved heads, in reality, it's because typhus was going wild and people were dying left and right. So they were shaving their heads to get rid of the fleas that were carrying the typhus. It was all about, you see these scenes where they're in these houses, these, shower houses or whatever, and you see this fog coming down. It's to kill the typhus fleas. It's not to kill, these Jews. And then I got that, if Hitler was so bad and he was trying to kill the Jewish population, why do you go through the trouble of shaving their heads or trying to fumigate them, or get rid of these fleas? You would just kill them. You would shoot them and be done. You wouldn't go through all these great lengths. And it was like, I just kept having question after question put in my mind. There's no doubt that bad things happen, but bad things happen on both sides of war. And I got that he was really no different than anybody else, but he was on the losing side. And then I got that the winners write the history books. So the people that were claimed to have won the war are going to share their story and their thoughts. And then I had this image too. It's like I saw this map of Germany and I saw a rake go over top of the map. And it was almost like it took out all the knowledge, all the history books, all of what's happened. And it was replaced by new books and new teachings and new teachers and everything else. And then I got, within a generation, you can change what is being taught and what people learn on a mass scale. I learned after all of this, after this reading, and of course I had tons of comments, both sides coming at me, and, I just report what I see. I like I said, I tried to stay biased as much as what I could. It was hard not to have a lot of thoughts, though, as I'm being propelled because I'm being challenged along the way. But I learned after this reading was done and some of the comments and feedback that I had coming back at me that, it was like illegal to talk about Hitler after the war because some people still loved him for what he did in changing the country around, but you couldn't talk about it. It was as if they really did wipe away his existence for who he was, and all they could do was paint a picture. And, it was like there was such a great fear of him changing the way that the banking system was and the financial system was, that they had to make sure that never happened again, that threat never came out again. And, it was a hard reading. It was very challenging, but very enlightening. I was a little nervous posting it, to be honest, but I'm glad I did. And I don't know, it was a real test of my, I guess my programming I've had my whole life versus getting something completely different. It was just really intense.
I have a question, and I have a reason for asking it. I don't know how your oracle works exactly. You've talked about it before, but I wondered if it was at all possible that some of what you were being shown, could that have been the viewpoint of someone who was there at the time? I mean, could you have been picking up like an entity or a spirit or something that someone who had experienced it, as opposed to actually getting sort of a universal, something from like the universal conscious or something?
Oh, absolutely. And when I go into a reading like this, especially one with Hitler, I mean, I've always been taught my whole life he's the most evil man that ever existed. So, you have that already kind of stuck to you going into this. So in clearing myself and preparing myself to do this reading, I have my crystal in my hand. I'm focused on the greater good, and I want to know truth. So those are like the things that I do when I go into every reading. I focus on the greater good. and I focus on the truth, and I see what comes forward from there. And it could come in different forms. It could be someone that maybe lived over there and died. It could be from the universal consciousness. I think it's almost like a conglomeration of all of it coming through to me. But the biggest thing that I got, and I have never had this in a reading before, it was like my reading went visualizing questions. It was just like question after question, like, you know, why didn't he kill people right away versus go through all this thing of having a concentration camp? Like, why would you go through the time and expense and effort of doing that if you just wanted to kill people? And, you know, like, who really made out in the end of the war? Like, Germany ended up paying out so much money. And, you know, it's like you take this thriving society and it ends up being crumbled and ruined, and he had a good financial thing going on. But who did that hurt? It was like, it was question after question that kept me going, and I've never had it come through to me like a PowerPoint presentation, but it most definitely did during this. And it was just really, it's like as I was typing it and going through the reading, it's like I was in astonishment at every little thing, because I was like, wow, okay. And then I would just keep going. It's just, it was one of those readings, and it was pretty moving at the end. I had to really reflect back, and it was like, wow, did this really all just come through? And I don't know if you've had that experience or not, but this was definitely a moment for me.
I have. The reason, though, that I'm asking was a couple of things I wanted to input here. One, my husband, who speaks German and lived in Germany for a while as a teenager and has done a lot of study of World War II, said that some of what you were saying and that you saw or that was explained to you was very much would have been often the viewpoint of many of the German people. Also, a lot of the explanations were what were given at the time when people asked questions. That was the one thing. The other thing is I'm actually somewhat older than you. And I grew up with people who had experienced things, including people who had been in the camps, people who would talk about it, especially to children, so they would remember. And I also had experience at the age of 16, hearing Corrie ten Boom speak, having absolutely no idea who she was. You know, this was before the book was popular. I think it had just been published or something, like a couple of weeks before. And I'd heard these stories when I was younger, but they just didn't make any sense to me. They didn't really make an impression that strongly because I was a little kid. But at 16, when I heard her speak, I was just riveted because, you know, I just had no idea. You know, consciously, I had no idea. And I'm also a pretty good judge of people, and she was telling the truth what happened to her. I don't know about anybody else, but I'm absolutely convinced. It was very much of a life-changing experience. So I also understand that you saw what you saw and you heard what you heard, and I thought you were extremely brave for going ahead and saying it, because it reminded me, I haven't had anything that powerful or that contradictory or that, you know, that unpopular, perhaps, of a message. But there have been times I've come back with "Don't shoot the messenger."
Yeah, and I did feel like that because, you know, like I said, going into this, it was hard. I mean, even as I'm typing it, you're thinking, really? Really? I mean, it was just really. And then I remember some of the comments, and like what you had shared, that people that lived through it and, you know, heard stories, or they had relatives that had some experiences over there that were kind of contradicting what I had to say or what was on the blog. And I got that, you know, some of the evil that happened might not have been directly from Hitler, but that doesn't mean he didn't have people working for him that didn't do horrible things to people. Like, maybe they weren't directed by him to do it, but it could have happened. But I just had a hard time feeling like Hitler gave the okay. Like, Hitler would say, yes, go ahead and do X, Y, Z to these people. But that doesn't mean that he didn't have people working beneath him kind of going against him. And I felt like that was a situation in some of these, like POA camps or these different camps that existed. But I didn't get that anything was set up with the intention of, okay, this is what you're going to do to people. It was more like people going rogue against him for their own reason. But yeah, I mean, and that's why I'm saying he's not perfect, but I don't see it panned out exactly how the history books have it written.
Well, history books are always written by winners, and I think there's really something to the economic thing you're picking up. The other, I'll just have to, you saw what you saw, and we'll just have to let the audience make up their own mind, but you may want to meditate on actually, too. This would be something that it'd be up to you, but I know you do a lot of meditation work. Just kind of ask, what was the source? Because, if it was somebody trying to explain to you how they felt and how they perceive things, it would explain a lot, because like I said, I can still remember when I thought on it later, being like about 11, and my orchestra teacher had a day when you could ask him anything. And someone said, what happened to you when you were our age? And, well, he killed a guard at the concentration camp he was imprisoned in and escaped at age 12 by hitting him on the head with a shovel.
Wow.
He said I was a large boy. And then, he starved and lived on the streets of Germany, managing to hide for the next couple of years until the war was over. So, people don't make things like that up. So I think but like I said, if what you're getting is someone trying to explain to you how they felt, how it was to be a German, I think that makes perfect sense, because that's exactly what my husband said. He said that's exactly how people felt, and and he also said, my husband said, the biggest mistake he thought that Hitler made was he felt like, obviously, maybe it wasn't Hitler or those around him, whoever it may have been, that they needed a scapegoat. And, by making the Jews a scapegoat and refusing to use any of their science and deporting as many of them as possible and possibly killing others and whatnot, they sent their best scientists, some of them away, like Einstein. And, my husband said Hitler could easily have won the war if he had allowed the scientists to stay and had them work.
No, that's really interesting. And you're right. That would be a good thing to meditate on. And I hadn't thought of doing that. In fact, this was such a deep topic. When I was done, I kind of cleared myself from it, because it was just challenging on many levels. Accepting what I got, it conflicted with what, my conscious mind knows. It was just really, it was a challenge.
Well, I think that, and I think what you may find, because I'm not saying one way or the other, and this show isn't about, telling guests whether they're right or they're wrong or whatever. This is just, to bring out information. But I do want to, but I think a bit more meditation on it. But like I said, I think you were very brave to just say, this is what I saw. It doesn't match with what I was taught, but this is what I saw. So I think it's something for everybody to think about. I think, however, we've had enough really heavy for a little while here. So why don't we move on to some nice, light topics like crystals?
Okay. I think that sounds great. Yeah, I've had a lot of questions about crystals, their effectiveness, what can you use them for, using them in meditation, why is meditation important? So all of these kinds of things are more the uplifting of the vibration questions. So I've done a lot of work with this, people wanting to know why meditation is important. And the biggest thing is when you elevate your vibration, you're able to be so much more in tune with yourself. You feel more connected to the universe. You feel more connected to people. It kind of brings about a oneness, and it makes you realize how we are similar versus how we're different. It's almost like this feeling of love that you have for people when you learn to meditate and bring your vibration up. So meditation is so important in, purging things and balancing yourself and reflecting upon yourself and just gaining insight. It really is a powerful, powerful tool. And crystals are one of the things that you can use to kind of boost that and help that. I use crystals all the time for protection, to sort of, build a wall to not let negative things attach to me, or I use them to help maintain a certain vibrational level during a meditation or when I'm doing a reading. And they're useful tools. And I think they're important. I would encourage anybody to, go into a rock shop and just walk around, hold your hand over different crystals. There's hundreds of them to pick from. They're designed to do different things. Some, are for your heart. Some maybe work with your astrological signs. Some are for protection. Some are for, maybe help you sleep. There's so many different things. But, when you go and you put your hand over the different variety, you can at times almost feel your hand vibrate, or you'll feel some kind of like this electrical pulse is how I would describe it feels, where certain ones are drawn to you. And it might be one today and a different one tomorrow. There's so many. And there's tons of information out there. There's books and books written on the variety of crystals, but I use them to maintain vibration. I use them to, form protection, help rid myself of negative energy. And,
do you have a favorite one?
I have a clear crystal quartz that I use almost in every reading. And I started using this one a couple years ago when I buckled down and got really serious. And I remember someone telling me about how, crystals can change over time depending on what they're used for and how often you use them. And I remember thinking, yeah, okay. And I wasn't sure how I felt about it. I used it because I had this sense of feeling safe or secure when I had it, whether it was in my mind or whether it was really keeping me safe. I didn't know, but it didn't matter because it made me feel safe. So whether it was placebo or not, I didn't care. So I always had this crystal in my hand. And over the years, this thing has turned cloudy. It has so many imperfections in it. And I truly believe it's absorbed negative energy, or it's almost been like it takes what I'm not supposed to have. It's almost formed a protective layer around me, I guess, so to speak. I mean, I have a lot of energy come and go through me and around me, in my home, all of that. So I always felt like I needed something that I felt protected me or elevated my vibration enough that I protected my own self. And this crystal physically changing is really kind of proven to me that they do work.
Yeah, I've had friends tell me that sometimes theirs wear out and they have to retire them or put them in salt for a while and find another one, because it's like they just, after a long time, they just sort of get so full of stuff, and they kind of, I've never had this experience, but they've told me, the crystal kind of lets you know when it needs to take a rest, and another one will come to you if that's what is supposed to happen.
You have been listening to part 1 of Cat's Eye on the Future. We'll return to the show right after these short messages.
Do you have questions? The cards have answers. If you would like a personal reading with Melodi, just go to my website, melodipsychicreadings.com. That's Melodi with an I, psychicreadings.com, for information, or email me at melodireader@gmail.com. Readings are available using Skype, phone, email, or even in person if you are lucky to live in Ireland. Why not find out what special messages the cards have just for you and book a private reading today?
We now return to part 2 of Cat's Eye on the Future.
I noticed on your blog you had quite a bit of information on meditation. I wonder if you wanted to go into that a little bit.
Well, sure, because meditation's hard because that's kind of a very vague term. For people that understand it and practice it, it's easy, and you know what that means. If someone says you need to go meditate, they know exactly how to go about that process. But for people that don't know or have never felt it, it's really confusing and can be kind of overwhelming. So I've had a lot of people come to me for advice of how do you do this, or how do you go about it, or is it even something worth doing or worth, mastering and figuring out how to go about the right process to do it. And what I always tell people is that meditation is a great way to be more in tune with yourself, because when you do that, you're quiet with your thoughts and you're sort of quieting down that rational part of your mind, and you're allowing your subconscious to flow freely and, give you thoughts, ideas, inspiration, if you're focused on your body, you can see where maybe you feel a little off. Maybe you see, something in your chest or your throat, and you focus on it, and it tells you, maybe you need to use your voice more, or maybe what you're saying isn't being heard, and give you some insight of maybe how to be heard more clearly. Just different things. So meditation can really clue you into a lot, whether it's something about yourself, something about, an issue, maybe something going on in the world that you want to get a little more clarity and understanding on. So I always encourage people to meditate, especially if they're going through a stressful time or a time where they don't really, know what's going on, and they just need more clarity or insight in a situation. And what I always tell people is, one, there's a lot of information online, and there's a lot of guided meditations. You can get them for free on YouTube. And I direct people to that a lot. But what a meditation feels like is essentially you're relaxing your body, and it's almost that feeling that you get before you fall asleep. You're just incredibly relaxed. But at the same time, you have to quiet out the noise of the outside. You can't be thinking about your grocery list or folding laundry, like all that stuff. You have to let it go. You're really in tune with yourself. I tell people to focus on either their breathing, maybe focus on a color, focus on the sun, focus on, the water. Get an image in your mind that allows you to hone in on that versus all the other outside noise that's going on. And then you just allow things to come to you. If you're worried about your job, or maybe it's a relationship, just allow thoughts to flow. Don't rush it. People, a lot of times the pitfall is you're anxious, or you have anxiety trying to get an answer right away, and it doesn't always come right away. It might be the next day. It might be the next 2 days later when you're standing in your kitchen. You just have this moment of, I know what I need to do. It'll make sense. You'll just know and have this confidence about knowing. But anyway, you let your mind just flow. And if you find yourself drifting off and, you hear the neighbor's dog bark, you just reset yourself, go back to your image that you're in, and try to go where you left off. And, maybe you get 2 minutes the first time. Maybe you get 3 the next time. Meditating is like an exercise, and the more you do it, the better you get. And eventually you'll get to where you almost can get in that zone instantaneously and maintain it for as long as what you feel like you need to. And then for people, I have some people that just cannot even do that. They cannot even relax for a minute without having something come in, from their rational side. And I tell them, stand in a hot shower. Sometimes it doesn't really matter how, you do it. Just try to have a quiet moment with yourself and build up to being able to do more of the official type meditating. So if you can't do it the official way, try to just find some way that you can get a quiet moment with your mind and allow your mind to flow. And it's so clearing, it's refreshing and empowering.
Well, yes, thank you. That was a great explanation. I'll just add that I really liked your idea of using music too. I found that often to be very helpful. When you can't do anything else, just put on the music that really sends you off and just sort of follow it.
Yeah, and you can even drive in your car without the music. Sometimes people do that when you're just, don't do it to where you're going to fall asleep, but, whatever you have to do to have that moment with yourself that you don't have 1,000 other thoughts going through your mind, that's really what it is. And once you learn how to do that, then you can move into the more official meditation. So, yeah, music is fantastic. And people will say, well, what kind of music? It's really whatever connects to you. Some people, they like drums. Some people like monotone. Some people like just instrumental music. It really doesn't matter what it is if it connects to you. That's the important thing.
Well, I think this part of the show has been really, really interesting. I think at this point, though, we wanted to we did another fun thing, slightly heavy topics, but a fun idea that we got from the last show, where we each took several topics and we looked at them separately and did separate readings. And then before the show, we came back together and discussed them. Now, 2 of them were ones we looked at last time, so we just kind of did a follow-up, because we knew we had a lot of really interesting stuff to talk in the first half of the show, so we didn't want to make this part really, really long. But we're going to review the 2 topics we did before, which is Ukraine and Yellowstone, and push them into 2016. And then we did a new topic, which we'll get into at the very end. Which one would you like to start with, Lynn? I think you should start.
If you want to start, we can do the Ukraine. We can go there.
Okay. Do you want me to say what I got, or okay? Well, I shortened mine a lot. I did a really long reading with cards and everything, but I won't go into all the details because it's complex. I'll try to possibly put it up on my website so people can read the reasoning. But basically, what I got was that this year things were going to be very driven by passion and emotions rather than necessarily reality. So you have a lot of stuff going on that just isn't necessarily really rational. But what is rational is something behind us has to do with wealth and money. It gets back to what you were talking about before. It's all, follow the money. And that's really a case with the Ukraine. And there's also a big lie and deception going on. What I couldn't tell from the cards is exactly what that lie and deception were, but I got the distinct impression that the Ukraine, the whole situation, was a distraction from something else. And again, that money and wealth might have a core part of this, which doesn't mean it isn't going to be a desperate situation, because I got the runes now these, which is need desperation, need fire, and also ing, which is the rune for harvest, only it seemed to be in its darker aspect. So we had this feeling of, people being cold and people being hungry and the seeds not being able to be planted. And one of the things that really bothered me, though, because I've got failed harvest down here, but also the thing about the rune nowadays is that it's also, it's 2 sticks rubbed together, so it makes primordial fire. But my husband's always seen that when you see that rune, you have to mention things that are nuclear. And I did this reading about 3 days ago before we're already getting headlines. Today's the 7th of February when we're recording this. There already is indications of, there's discussions of nuclear in the headlines. I couldn't tell from the reading if it felt like it might be a power plant that was affected in some way, maybe had a meltdown, could be actual nuclear weapons, could be just talking about the topic. But that felt to me one of the most unnerving and kind of scary things about this reading. What I didn't see was, I didn't see World War III this year. But I didn't see, I didn't think things settling down really either. It just seems to become an ongoing, hot, cold situation. Okay, what did you get?
Well, that's interesting that you said that about the nuclear stuff, because I had not heard that either. And when I did mine and sent my email, I think a couple of days ago or a day ago, I had gotten that there's going to be some nuclear activity this year. I didn't see it as soon as right now. I saw it more like mid-year. But it looked to me that there were going to be some weather manipulations going on, and as a result of that, it was intentionally going to be directed toward the nuclear plants, and I felt like it was a nuclear plant on the water itself that they were going to be attacking. And part of doing that is getting this area in the Ukraine sort of isolated away from everybody else. I felt this feeling of resources being depleted and this alienation from everybody. And I saw the citizens of Crimea wanting to get out and get away. They're like, we don't want any part of Russia coming here and doing this. And then the nuclear attack or the nuclear issue, that kind of exacerbated it, where they wanted to get out of there. And I see Russia closing the border down and not letting the people out because they want the people there to do the jobs and to kind of maintain what they have. So I hadn't heard about the nuclear stuff as of yet. I felt like that was going to happen more mid-year than it's going to happen now. And I just see a lot of these passive-aggressive attacks. I don't see anything blatant as far as a plane being flown there and bombs being dropped, but it's more, I see it more like weather manipulation and maybe socially or restrictions put on them and trying to squeeze them in different ways. It's almost like countries aren't being obvious about it. They're trying to just do tactics that kind of feel sort of quiet and under the scenes, as if they don't want things in the headline as to what they're doing. It's like they want Russia in this situation to be painted as much larger and much more negative than what the retaliation of it is. But in reality, there's both sides are doing things to each other, and it just seems like ongoing, like what you said. And then I had this thought today. You know, I don't see what looks like an all-out war. I don't see a bunch of troops there. I don't see the airplanes and tanks and all that. I don't see anything like that happening in 2015. But it occurred to me, is there a war going on already and we're just not seeing it? And I kind of got the answer, yes. It's more like these passive-aggressive attacks to Russia. You know, we're doing this stuff with the oil and undercutting the oil, and we're doing all these things that feel like aggression towards them, but yet it's not a typical war. It's more this economic thing going on. The nuclear stuff with the weather is a little more blatant and obvious, but nonetheless, it's not like we're calling in our troops and sending them there. So I see a lot of that kind of thing going on for 2015.
Yeah, and when the stuff in the paper today wasn't actually an attack or anything. There was just like headlines like, you know, which may or may not be the case, but where things like, you know, Russia moves nuclear missiles to the border type stuff. That wasn't the exact one, but it was things like that. The word was used quite a bit, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. Because that wasn't in here 2 days ago, and when you saw this and I saw this. So it's sort of like the rumblings of stuff in the background. But yeah, I think the same thing. So I think we can put that down for when we look at this at the end of the year, that neither of us saw it like World War III, but it definitely, it is an ongoing war, I think. And I think money is, I don't know how exactly, money always plays into war, but there's something about this that and what I'd like to know is what we're being diverted from. Mm-hmm. Because I kept getting that feeling of this is a distraction.
I think it has to do with a lot of the financial stuff going on and just distracting from those bigger issues. You know, we'll talk about some of them later, but I think it's a distraction from a lot bigger things that people care and worry more about because they hit more directly at home. This is just, it's almost talk. It's just something to be in the news so you're not focused on the things happening in your backyard, so to say.
Yeah, I think you're right. Okay, well, let's move on to Yellowstone, and then we'll want to get to the underrating at the end. Did you want me to go first again, or did you want to go first on this one?
Oh, I can go. That's fine. With regards to Yellowstone, a lot of what we said for last year, that was true. It didn't erupt. There's a lot of activity, a lot of strange things going on. But as far as an eruption, that didn't happen, luckily. And when I look into 2015, I still see activity. It still has a lot of energy tied to it, but I don't see an all-out eruption. I got that there's going to be newer instrumentation used to try to determine different statistics, but I get we're going to be protected from that information, meaning whatever they get, they aren't going to reveal. And then the strange thing that I got at the very end of my reading, when I focused in on this, is I got an image of people that live there, or these like higher up political people, are actually shopping for land in other areas that are far away from Yellowstone, meaning maybe parts of Eastern Canada, maybe even as far as Africa. I just felt like there was something completely remote from that area that we're trying to shore up land somewhere else. So in the event of this catastrophe, we have somewhere else to go. Like, I get there's going to be some base elsewhere that they're already setting up to send people to when things start to really act up. And they're not being completely truthful about the level of activity out there. And I get that what they consider normal is always changing. Like, oh, well, this is a normal range, but what's considered normal now wasn't normal a year ago or 5 years ago. Like, I get there's a lot of hidden things happening there. One, to not create panic, because there's really nothing you can do about it. If it erupts, it erupts. But two, you know, they want to get people who have the funds and resources to get out of there, they're almost like giving them the first chance to relocate somewhere else.
That's really interesting. And remember, my listeners, we didn't do this together. We came together after we did our readings, and we did discuss it, but we did them independently. Okay, what I got was very similar. I have no large epic eruptions, but a smaller one is possible, especially again towards the end of the year. I don't feel this is near. It's kind of unlikely, but it's kind of there a little bit. But there is some chance of travel or work disrupted. The travel card and the work card came up very strongly, and I have written down people relocating. You know, it felt like not necessarily a mass exodus, but something that happens may cause some people to want to leave. What I couldn't tell whether this was the result of some particular event, or maybe just even a part of the park was, you know, disrupted and people couldn't go where they wanted to go, or they had to move something, or this was people moving to another part of the country. But it's definitely that sense of work and travel disrupted by something. The other thing I got is very similar but slightly different, or perhaps slightly more targeted. I felt that there was a scientist or a group of scientists that form a new theory or find something new that's going to cause a change in how things are viewed or how they view what's happening. I don't know. I got no sense whatsoever whether this would be shared with the public or not, but I got the sense that that there is not only a new situation developing more than likely, but that there is this scientist or this group of scientists that will come up with this theory to explain some of the new activity that's going on. And the interesting thing is what I got for the new activity or an activity was the runes Lagaj and Kenaj. Now, Lagaj is lake water or water. It's what we get our English word lake from. So it's this body of water. And then Kenaj is what I call, and I really do call it this, you can go look on my blog, the sideways volcano rune. It's a V turned sideways, and it leans literally a torch or a boil. In other words, something about to erupt or explode. So what this really comes up with is either water volcano or volcanic lake. And it feels like something changes or happens, possibly in that big lake that we know things have been happening with that's near the center of the park, or another lake, or possibly one of the geysers that helps lead to this new theory or this event. And it could even be a precursor to an actual lava eruption. If it is, again, I think it's small, but you also have these overlays of like water eruption, water volcano, and I think that's going to be one of the first signs. But again, I do not feel that 2015 will be a big, like, you know, life-changing, catastrophic eruption, but it will, you know, there might be a small one. Any comments from, I know you had a little bit on the water, I think, from,
yeah,
or the lake, yeah.
Yes, when I was listening to this, I got this image when you were talking about the sideways volcano and the water and all of that. It's like I saw this enormous geyser erupting. It wasn't lava, but it was water. So it was a strange image that went with exactly what you were saying as you were talking. So that'll be interesting to see if something like that erupts, or I don't know, but it seems enormous and magnificent, and like people were drawn from everywhere to see that. So I had to stop for a minute because to take all that in, that was pretty cool. And then the one thing that I got too, when you were talking about, you know, new lakes or some kind of, you know, this body of water, I got images around that area. It was like a dry lake bed. It had a bunch of cracks in it. So I'm not sure how that relates, because I couldn't see how that fit into my line of thinking or how the impressions were flowing, but I don't know if there's situations or possibly an earthquake that changes some of the water flow, or possibly it's climate. But I see some dry lake beds. I'm not sure how that fit in.
It fits in actually very well because, again, growing up in a very seismically active area, California hasn't had any volcanic eruptions in the last, I think it's been about 100 years now, but it's got a lot of activity. It's very common when magma starts moving either before earthquakes or before actual volcanic eruptions or when things are heating up. Sometimes springs will show up out of nowhere, or water springs that have been flowing for hundreds of years suddenly stop. And you can have situations happen where like a crack opens up under a lake and all the water goes away.
That's interesting.
Overnight.
I did not know that. I mean,
it's rare, but it happens. People have recorded it, and they now know, they can go and they can look. And usually it's smaller things but that's one of the first things people in, like in California will ask if things are getting weird. It's like, if you hear reports that the spring has stopped or a new spring has sprung up, water's coming out of the ground where it didn't before, that's a pretty good sign that something's moving around.
See, that's the beautiful thing of doing readings like this, because, when one person gets an image that may not make sense, it could make complete sense to someone else, and it kind of completes the story. Where I might have a blank, you're able to fill it in, and that's what makes this type of format fun, I think. But
I think so too, and you fill in things as well. I mean, it's completely mutual. It's just I happen to know a little. I'm also just kind of a geek when it comes to stuff like that. So I'm real interested in volcanoes and earthquakes, and always have been. Well, so anyway, so we can sum up. I think we both say that, as I told my husband, guess what? Good news. Yellowstone is, at least by our predictions, is unlikely to blow up into a catastrophic explosion this year. Next year we don't know about, but we know this year it's probably okay. And okay, now I think from there, our last topic we wanted to look at was the euro currency, and I think I'm going to turn over to you first, and you can chat about what you got, and then I can fill in a few things.
Okay, great. When I first tuned into this, I didn't feel good about it. I will say the energy doesn't feel good about the situation that's going on with the euro right now. I saw that it's going to kind of steadily decline in value due to the inflation and due to, the Swiss bank and all of the dynamic of what's happening there. People are nervous, and when people are nervous, they tend to kind of withdraw. And I see that that's what's happening, which isn't helping the situation. It's actually hurting it because of all the worry and the anxiety that's tied to the euro right now. People just don't have a lot of faith in it. So I see that it's going to continue to kind of decline. I actually got, and maybe this is because of my other readings that I did, a lot of Hitler in Germany references, as if some of Europe is going to try to pull together and take some of the philosophies of what Hitler did to turn Germany around and try to bring this euro back up, or do something to boost the economy, to bring the economy back up, which lends more worth to the euro. So I see a lot of kind of creative thought trying to happen right now. I also got an image of, during this process of when they try to formulate a new plan of approach to turn things around before it gets worse, sometime probably third quarter of 2015, I get this freeze, kind of like what they did with Cyprus, where no activity goes on because people start panicking, pulling money out, all this movement's going on, and it's like they want to just say freeze. It's almost like when you play freeze tag was the image I got. And they're like, freeze, stop. They needed a minute to get their thoughts together to kind of move in a new direction. So I see them doing that. And they kind of call it like the bank holiday, or they have a term for it, but it looked like a pause to me. And what they do is they want some kind of a bailout from other countries, which I see that gets denied. That was kind of one of the ideas that they had. The second thing that they wanted to do is start getting their gold back. They want to start housing their gold that's been shipped off here and there and, lent off to other places. And they have a hard time with that because I get the gold reserve has been loaned out to so many different layers of people that you can't even get a true ownership on who owns what, because it's been borrowed by this person, lent to this person. So that's a mess too. So in the process, what they do is I see a lot of bartering going on. Again, a lot of German references with regards to that. And the last thing that I see is, because they are in kind of dire times, they need some money pumped back into their economy. Some other countries come in and they won't loan money, but they rather buy up stuff, whether they're buying a business, buying property, doing that kind of thing. And I get this impression that a lot of Europe is actually going to be owned by other countries that aren't European. And that's going to be a trend that starts really being prevalent by the end of 2015.
Okay, again, we did these readings separately, and it was very interesting because when I did this particular reading, I laid out my cards, and they were actually very confusing to me at first. And my husband happened to call me from med school while this was going on, and he said, well, tell me your cards. So I told him. And we thought about it for a while, and I'm going to go into some of what we both interpreted. But then he did his own rune reading on it. So this is going to be kind of a combination of what he and I both saw. And my husband's actually written books on rune readings. He doesn't do them professionally, but he's probably one of the leading, 5 or 10 rune readers alive, so on the planet today. So take that for what it's worth. But anyway, what we got was the basic thing I got the now card, which was sort of like right now, the immediate thing that's going on is that there may seem to be a temporary end to this crisis. It's not going to last, but this attempt at heading off or dealing with the crisis is probably headed by a strong female leader. I independently thought Angela Merkel, and my husband did as well, but he doesn't follow the news much. And I have, Christine Lagarde may play part of this, but basically it's a strong woman, and she has a lot to do with putting this new partnership or this new arrangement in. Now, what I couldn't tell is the arrangement because Greece leaves the euro or it stays in. I just really can't tell. But for a short while, however that plays out in the next couple of weeks, that's it's going to look like it's okay. But then it goes from looking okay to getting really stuck. And I get this image of kind of a moribund economy that just isn't going anywhere, and jobs and employment is particularly affected. We got the work card, and we've got the home card, which is just like overshadowing the whole thing. So it's like people really start feeling at home that this is a problem and that things are just not going anywhere, and you get this kind of growing sense of anger and upset. It takes a while. It takes quite a while, but it just sort of leads to the unraveling of whatever this agreement is, and that brings instability. Now, my husband threw the runes, or rather he had me throw the runes, and I told him what they were because he didn't have his set with him. But he had me throw them, and I described it to him, and he got really quiet, and he said, I don't like this. This looks like buried economic resentment exploding with a big chunk of racist, possibly nationalistic response, And he said the runes manage, which is partnership, which I'd gotten to, or alliances, and Athala, which means homeland, taken together can be very good, but he said, I've got a really bad feeling about this. Now, the thing about the rune Athala is it was used from the 19th century on by sort of German Romanicist scholars as the rune of the German homeland, the rune of Greater Germany. In fact, to this day, you don't wear the rune Athala in public in Holland, and I think in Germany as well, because it was used by the National Socialists as a sort of symbol for the Greater German Empire. Thankfully, it didn't get quite the bad a connotation as the swastika did, which was also a very ancient Germanic symbol, but it got bad enough that people in the countries affected don't tend to use it as much. But normally it would mean homeland, inherited wealth, and money. So we have this money echo again, and partnerships among old families and old wealth, which may also be playing a role here. But anyway, so you've got this, he doesn't like what it looks like because he feels this burgeoning chunk of nationalism building as a response to what people see as an increasingly bad economic situation. And then he says, and I have this in red, the same rune staves could have predicted the Nazi rise if one had been reading them in, say, 1933 instead of 2015. So, again, this German Nazi connection that you sort of sensed as well, and this was completely independent, and this wasn't even my take on it. This was my husband's, who is much more steeped in the history of that time period as well as a traditional Germanic mindset. And I have to sum up, our joint feeling was pretty much that in the short term, like right now, some sort of agreement will be reached. that causes some amount of peace and quiet, and things settle down for a time. This is maybe brokered or suggested by Angela Merkel or some other women leader, but the solution's only be temporary. It's going to be like a Band-Aid. And as people continue to be economically affected in their home and work lives, gradually and slowly, the economic conditions, probably relating in some way to the euro, becoming increasingly not seen as good currency. The peace or the peace card that I had morphs into this kind of stagnation, and economic growth either stops or starts to decline. And as a result of this economic tension, there's going to be likely a dramatic rise in social tension and upheaval with probably racial and possibly a nationalistic sidelines. Basically rise of fascism is highly possible, and maybe with the persecution of minority groups or some other, really not nice stuff. So that's what we got. I didn't get this stuff, didn't pick up on the EU sort of winding up being owned by other countries, but I did definitely get this sense of things are not going well by the end of 2015. I don't know that they break up by the end of 2015, but there's just a lot of volatility going on there.
Yeah, I agree. I see a lot of, people feeling like they don't believe in the system, a lot of anxiety, a lot of worry. And I see a lot of other countries coming in, but rather than give aid, they just kind of start buying up little pieces of Europe, and it helps the economy, it boosts the economy, but people are very leery and cautious of it too.
Yeah, my husband was really worried about it. He was saying how when people don't get, when they're unemployed, if they get this feeling that immigrants were a minority or anybody is getting something that they're not getting, that they should be getting, it creates a scapegoat.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very concerned about that. And also it's just, but like I said, the interesting thing to watch will be to see if in the next couple of weeks things do sort of look like they've rearranged themselves. Because that would be I think a time marker on this one. If that doesn't happen, then maybe I've misinterpreted something here. But we could go back over it again. But I think we're both really. I think it's fascinating. The positive thing though is you were seeing some of the German economic stuff, or even some of the National Socialist stuff in terms of economics. If it's not combined with persecuting individuals, the economics itself could actually be a one way to improve. Did you actually see perhaps Germany pulling back into itself and maybe dropping the EU or the euro?
And I did kind of get that impression that it is going to be almost like how it was during, the time of Hitler. He was very German-centric. He wanted his people kind of segregated off from everybody else, but at the same time, he took what was turned upside down and he really brought it back. And I saw some of those ideals coming through, and I even got countries outside of Germany were looking at that almost like a template of how to do it and how to turn it around. So it'll be interesting to see by the end of the year what truly happens if Germany tries to pull out, or if maybe some of the German ideals are implemented to, promote the economy or the situation.
Well, it's interesting because you could really read Monage Othello combination as the partnership of Greater Germany. So we'll just have to watch on that. Well, I think we have to come back and look at this one probably in 6 months to see where we're going on it, because it sure is interesting. But I think this has been a really, really great show. 90 minutes have just flown by like you would not believe. I've had a great time, and I think you did too.
Oh, I did. Thank you so much for having me on. It was intense, but it was good. I mean, we had such a mix of energy. It was great. I had a great time.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, I look forward to having you back again soon.
I look forward to being back again. I enjoy the joint readings. I enjoy all of it. So it's been really great.
And before we go, why don't you once again give our listeners your website and how to contact you?
Sure. My website is psychicfocus.blogspot.com, and I can be found through there, and my direct email is yourpsychicfocus@gmail.com. So either way, you can get a hold of me, but all of my readings and blog entries are on my blogspot.com website.
fantastic. Well, we'll say goodnight for now, and I'll say goodnight to all of my listeners, and see you next time here at Cat's Eye on the Future.
You have been listening to Cat's Eye on the Future, the show where we take a look at what's coming up in your world and your future. Join us again next time for another episode of Cat's Eye on the Future.